The following podcast is created and sponsored by High Beam Ministry.
Long, beautiful hair, shining, gleaming, steaming, flaxen, waxing. Give you down to there, shoulder length or longer. Here, baby, there, mama, everywhere, daddy, hair.
But if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. So, what covering are we talking about here? When we talk about being covered or uncovered, we're talking about long hair versus short hair.
Long, beautiful hair, shining, gleaming, steaming, flaxen, waxing.
Hey, Frank.
Yeah?
I got a secret.
Really? I didn't think we had secrets between brothers.
Well, we don't, but this is a good one.
Really? Tell me what it is.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
I listen to the Truth Barista every week.
No. Are you kidding? What's the Truth Barista?
Well, it is where everything gets explained. I mean, you name it, they explain it. Here, let me give you my phone, and I'll open it here. Okay, here it is.
Donuts.
Oh, no, that's not it. Okay, I got it. Here it is.
Welcome to the Erzatz Coffee Shop. This is Jay, your Truth Barista, and I'm serving up a steamy cup of God's truth for the average Joe. You can catch me and this podcast on my websites, truthbarista.com, all one word, truthbarista.com, and highbeamministry.com. That's HIGHBEAM ministry.com, as in car high beam. We're shining the light of God's truth on the road ahead.
Truth Barista, I just have to tell you something.
What?
I have so enjoyed this study that has confused me about women in ministry or women in the church with their hair and the covering and all of that. I'm telling you, this stuff is so good, and it's opening my eyes in a new way. Thank you. Thank you.
It is really fun. I'm really glad you're enjoying it. So, hey, stop standing there and take a sit down and grab your coffee and let's go through this, because there's a little bit more from last week that I didn't get to share, because you were talking about things like, why should a woman have her head covered because of the angels and weird stuff like that Paul's talking about. And really, if we really discuss this, the reason people don't understand this, as I said last week, is they don't know the context out of which this came. So if you start reading Paul from a 21st century, am I in the right century here?
Well, sometimes we wonder, but yes.
Okay, the 21st century perspective on a first century incident or teaching, it just doesn't make sense. We're separated by 2,000 years. Things change,
What's helpful to me is the fact that you're talking culture and cultural things that happened in the first century. And Paul was trying to mediate between culture and the church, and that's where most of this stuff comes from, right?
Right. Let's put it back into perspective, like we talked about last week. Paul is talking to a Messianic Jewish stream. Okay, it's a Messianic stream of Judaism, and Gentiles are coming into this Messianic Jewish stream.
So the Messianic stream, explain that, because that is confusing to me.
Okay, within the Judaism of the day, as I've studied other authors, there wasn't a Judaism, there were Judaisms, meaning there are various streams, as I call it, of Judaism. There was the Pharisee sect of Judaism. They were much more conservative. They followed the written and the oral law, the oral Torah. You had the Sadducees. They were primarily centered around temple worship and kind of controlled the environs of Judaism as it was expressed around Jerusalem. You had the Essenes, who were very ascetic types. The Essenes were the Qumran people out by the Dead Sea. You've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, they were kind of like monks out in the desert. They thought all of Judaism had been corrupted in Jerusalem because it kind of was in lockstep with Romans at the time. So they said, forget you guys. We're going out to the desert and we're going to have our own little kind of enclave out here of really conservative Judaism. There were the Zealots, and these were Jews that were against Roman occupation. And besides just those four mainstreams, there were a multitude of different Jewish expressions. And there was a fairly common in Jesus' day, expectation of a coming Messiah. Well, you read the book of Acts and you find out that they did recognize, this is Theudas, I think was his name, popped up and he claimed to be somebody. And then there was this guy, this Judas, and I'm missing the names, but you get them when you read through Acts. There's this guy who claimed to be the Messiah, and they followed him out in the desert and they all died, So there was a messianic expectation. Well, rightly so, because it was time for God to bring forth his Messiah, and we Christians believe that it was Jesus. And so there was the stream of Jewish people that believed Jesus was the Messiah. And so now came another stream of a Judaism in the first century, a messianic form of Judaism, believed Jesus was the Messiah.
Well, I sure appreciate that. I have to tell you a little story, just quickly. When I first heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know what I thought they were saying?
What?
Dead Sea Trolls. Oh. And these Dead Sea Trolls are out there writing, scripts or whatever, but I guess it isn't trolls, it's scrolls.
Yeah, but they lived in caves, and that's where they found the scrolls. So you might have something there. And by the way, how old were you when you were there?
Well, I was old enough to know better, but that's true with my life in general.
Okay, that's very funny. I'll have to remember that. Okay, anyway, back to our study here. So what happened, just to kind of put it in context, is you had this messianic stream of Judaism that was growing in Jerusalem. It made the jump to Antioch, and it basically followed Jewish lines throughout the Roman Empire and took hold throughout the Roman Empire. Well, Corinth was one of those major cities, and of course it would reach Corinth because Corinth was a major trading city. It had a Jewish population there, and so Paul, others reached out, and it took hold in a messianic Jewish synagogue. Now, Gentiles were often drawn to Judaism because it had a very strong moral base to it with the Ten Commandments. It had a very modest base to it. Now, you compare that with Corinth. Corinth was very secular. It was very immodest. It was basically a sin city of, the Roman world here. And so this messianic stream got very enticing to Gentiles, and they attached themselves, and some even converted.
It was like a Las Vegas of the Middle East.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. So now you have Gentiles who are coming into this messianic movement, but they're bringing in their Gentile culture that is informed primarily because they're living in Corinth. Okay, now that's clashing with the Jewish culture that's there within the synagogue, and Jews have learned since the Babylonian exile 500 years earlier, you have to hold on to your culture or you'll be assimilated. So now within this synagogue, you've got a clash of Gentile and Jewish cultures. Also within this synagogue, you have a clash between the messianic teachings of Jesus and the traditions that were very popular because of the Pharisee movement and these other Judaisms. So now you had a clash of Jewish tradition versus what the messianic said, this is biblical truth. And that sets the stage for what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians here.
I love it. That's the backdrop, because now you're going to talk about the cultural traditions that oftentimes people get confused about.
Let's think of it as a stage. I've just set the backdrop, or the set pieces, and now what we're going to do is we're going to start moving the furniture around to give some definition. Here's the issue. In the Judaism of that day, and we talked about this last week, the tradition was to keep your head covered if you were a man and if you were a woman. Why? Because according to Judaism, we are sinful, which is true, and we do not stand worthy before God. That is also true, unless you happen to be of this messianic stream of Judaism. So because of this new tradition, this new messianic tradition, our sin has been forgiven, so therefore we don't have to keep our heads covered, and furthermore we've been cleansed from sin, so now we stand worthy before Jesus. So the two bases upon which the Jewish culture said you had to keep your heads covered is, compared to the biblical truth revealed in Jesus, null and void. So this is the issue. Well, do we wear head coverings? Do we not? Okay, if the man doesn't have to, what about the woman? Does the woman have to keep her head covered or not? Well, if she doesn't keep her head covered, she has the freedom to have her hair long or out, just as the man does. now you're butting up against the Corinthian culture, because if your hair went long, or even in a Jewish culture, if your hair was left unbound, that is a sign of a loose woman. Loosed hair, loosed woman. This is where that comes from. In Numbers, there's a test for an adulterous woman. One of the first things they do is they let down her hair as part of this adultery test. We'll talk about that sometime. It's really fascinating. But the woman out in Corinthian culture, if she let her hair down, that was a symbol of a prostitute. So Paul is saying, okay, well, if we want to eliminate that, then maybe they should just keep their head shaved in the synagogue, because that would show they were a Nazarite. They're a faithful woman. In fact, this is a very faithful woman. But the problem is, a shaved head in another culture is an accusation that you were convicted of adultery. So Paul is really trying to address a conundrum that this body is facing. How do you do this without giving this impression? Because now, if you keep your head covered, it's a reflection on God. So how does that reflect on God? Well, if my head's covered, then I must be in sin, and I must be worthless before God. That reflects poorly on Jesus. So keep your head uncovered. But if my head's uncovered, then I could be a loose woman, and that reflects poorly on my husband. Not just in here in the synagogue, out there in the culture. So what should we do? This is what Paul is addressing.
And when we come back from grabbing another hot cup of coffee so we can continue this absolutely fascinating study. So let's grab that and we'll be right back.
Let's go.
That sweet aroma, bold and beautiful, I can hardly wait to taste. Early morning, something wonderful is about to make my day. Hey, give me a good cup of coffee, give me a word that rocks me, a whole lot of Jesus and a little caffeine. You and my awakening, the world awaits out the front door. Let it wait just a bit more, 'cause I need Jesus and a little caffeine. You and my awakening.
This is Maurice. I am the host at the Ersatz Coffee Shop, and you are listening to the Truth Barista podcast.
Thank you for joining us today. In today's world, we need to know more about life than what we are fed through our normal channels of communication. Even in many of our churches, we are not hearing the whole truth about God and His Word. Pastors today are often afraid to address the themes in culture that might get them to be targeted by the cancel culture. Congregations are divided on the issues, and it makes a pastor's job more difficult to address those spiritual areas that might divide the church. This was one of the reasons the Truth Barista came into existence. We wanted to provide a message without any strings attached or be subjected to division in the church. We want to bring you a strong biblical message that doesn't come with limitations or restrictions on what can be said. No one wants to have information withheld from them, right? We all want to know the truth. The Truth Barista is a podcast that brings you truth based on God's Word, the Bible. We hope that you'll become a regular listener and be informed on the truth concerning the issues of our day. Join the RSS family by providing your email address on our website, and you'll be sent a link every time a new podcast comes out. Our website is highbeamministry.com. That's highbeamministry.com.
I love the Truth Barista, Bart, as long as I have my donut.
Oh, thank you for that cup of joe. Oh, that's so tasty. Okay, I am so wired right now. Are you ready?
I am so excited about this. I mean, it's like it's just opened up a whole new door of understanding.
Okay, well, let's get right into it. So what Paul basically concluded where we stopped in the scripture, which is 1 Corinthians 11, verse 6. Paul is saying men aren't obligated to cover their heads because of the tradition of shame for sin and unworthiness doesn't line up with the truth. They're saved from sin, made worthy through Jesus. Women also didn't need to cover their heads for the same reason unless it reflected poorly on their husbands. Then they had the authority to decide along with their husbands, and now we're going to finish this section. So turn to 1 Corinthians 11, verse 7. This is what a woman has to keep in mind, and we're going to go through this bit by bit, okay? And you tell me if you don't understand something here. Verse 7, a man, in fact, should not cover his head because he is God's image and glory, but a woman is man's glory. what does all that have to do, image and glory and stuff?
Well, I think he was created, the man was created first, and woman was taken out of him.
Okay.
So one is the glory of God, one is the glory of man.
Right. Paul actually defines that in 2 Corinthians 3. We all, with unveiled or uncovered faces, are reflecting the glory of the Lord and are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory. This is from the Lord who is of the Spirit. Notice image and glory are tied together in that verse, and now they're linked to reflection. Mankind are a reflection of God in the image we bear and the glory that's in us.
So that image is male and female. That's the glory.
That is the image of God, is
Right.
found in both male and female traits. Yeah, we talked about that earlier. It's mind-blowing when you really get back to this. Now, here's the other thing is, just as a man or mankind is a reflection of God, so a woman is a reflection of man because she was created out of him. He's talking about Adam and Eve. So he's going, we have to keep this in mind, people. The decisions you make reflect on others, primarily God first, and now for you women, your husband as well. See, that's what Paul's getting at. So, regarding the covering issue, Paul is pointing out that a man has one glory, God, but a woman has two, God and her husband, if she's married. If she's uncovered, that could reflect well on her husband, or poorly, depending on the observer. Paul's focus on her is as being the glory of her husband is because the head covering only has to do with required modesty for married women, not anything to do with the authority issue. She has to consider two heads where he only has to consider one.
And none of this makes her less than.
No, absolutely not. Let me drive a spike into this, okay? Man and woman were separated from one image. They are two equal halves of the same image, although gender has been differentiated and somehow physical aspects, emotional aspects, others have been somewhat differentiated. I mean, we joke about it because they're truisms, but really the man and the woman together make the full image of God, and that's another reason why we kind of fight against the same-sex marriage issue, because you're dealing with two same halves of an image. Doesn't work. It's like dancing with two left feet.
I've been accused of that, by the way. But, you know, this is another rabbit trail, and I don't want to go down it. But at the same time, the image that God created men and women race-wise is the same thing. One race isn't better than the other. We're all part of one another.
You know, we talked about racism a while back, but that's a great point. I just was reading an article today by a woman who said there is no such thing as race, simply because we are all just different colors of the same human race. So her advocacy was just shut up and get on with life, because
Amen.
This is totally ridiculous to focus on this. So let's move forward here. Okay, verse 8. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man. We gloss over that, but he's talking about Eve's creation from Adam. Now listen to this, verse 9. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. What's he saying? Paul brings up the natural order of creation here. Man first, woman second. But the issue is, why was woman created for man? To complete him, to complement him. Not just to say he's a nice guy and really handsome, okay, but to be his perfect match. So God took the image, split it into two parts, and the woman was created for him to be his perfect counterpart.
Now, that wasn't an afterthought, was it?
That's the primary thought.
Well, that's the primary thought. But I mean, some people say, well, that's why she's lesser than the man, because she was kind of taken out of him sort of as an afterthought.
Okay, and I will kill that thought right away, because in Genesis 1:28, God looks at the couple and says, okay, all y'all, you need to reproduce, and all y'all, both of you, need to rule together. They are on equal footing and authority.
Well, the only way they can reproduce is together.
Exactly. Only way they can effectively rule in authority over the earth is by doing it together. If a woman doesn't have authority, or if it's subservient to a man, it is not possible to rule effectively. You're spilling your coffee all over the place.
Well, I am. I want to say, Hallelujah.
Okay, but how she makes these decisions does reflect on her husband. So let's get into this. Verse 10, for this reason the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Now you mentioned this is a little weird, right?
Oh, this is a weird verse.
Okay, first of all, we have to understand that in the New King James Version and King James Version, there are italicized words. Those italicized words indicate that that word is not in the original Greek or Hebrew. It was inserted by the editors to make it read how they think it would likely read. Now, it's not bad, and in many cases it's good. It helps smooth the language, but sometimes they can get into the way and alter a meaning and not get it where it should be. So here's what it says if you read it literally. For this reason, the woman ought to have authority on her head. Notice a symbol of is taken out, and it's because of the angels. So authority on her head is an idiom for a woman's authority. The word authority is never used for a covering being a symbol of a man's authority over her. Paul is not talking about a covering in this verse. He's talking about a person's authority to do something. Now, back to John Lightfoot, not Gordon. John, okay? His comments on the tradition says that the woman's covering is never a sign of being under a man's authority. I mean, he got this 400 years ago, okay? It was a sign of never being under man's authority. It's only about modesty. What Paul is saying is this: for a certain reason, a woman should have authority for herself. For what reason? Because a woman was created from man and for man, and they both share the same authority. That's why he's going, women, don't give up authority to them. You got your own authority. You walk in that authority because you're both authorities together. Work together. Be authorities together. Rule together. That's the point Paul's reinforcing here. Okay, so in other words, she can make her own authoritative decisions. But why should she have authority on her head? And here's your question. Because of the angels. Okay, Paul has already talked about this. 1 Corinthians 5 is about the Corinthians needing to judge the immorality in their midst, right? A guy was sleeping with his aunt, his father's sister. Okay, chapter 6 says this: dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? In other words, why are you taking this to a secular court and not dealing with it in your own body? Don't you know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matter? You're going to be judging the world. In fact, you're going to be judging angels. Why submit yourselves to a stupid secular court in religious or spiritual matters? Paul is rebuking them for going outside of the system, so to speak, the spiritual system. Now, what does it mean? What do you think it means that we're going to be judging angels?
Well, I think that angels never were meant to be in the authority business. They're messengers. But Revelation tells us that we will rule and reign with Christ.
And who bosses around the angels, so to speak?
The Lord.
Exactly. So if we are seated in the heavenly places alongside Jesus, even though he and humanity were created a little lower than the angels for a time, according to the Psalm, we will be elevated. He's elevated first as the first among many brethren, many brothers and sisters. We will rule and reign with him, which means now angels will be under us. And I'll let you know when we get there. But when all of this is restored, we're actually going to be judging and leading and ruling angelic beings and spiritual beings in the universe, not just on earth.
Oh, I can't wait. I want to control a big angel.
And we want to pump you up.
So back to 1 Corinthians 11:10. Because women share authority with men, they all need to stop letting a fallen and worldly viewpoint make their decisions, whether it's in the synagogue, Jewish tradition versus Messianic Jewish truth, or out in the culture, Gentile traditions versus spiritual truth. Paul's saying you're able to judge for yourselves, because in the next world, you're going to be judging angels. Learn how to make decisions together. So here's verse 11. However, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man. Man is not independent of woman. For just as a woman came from man, so man comes through the woman. And by the way, there's italicized words there again. For just as woman from man, so man through woman and all things come from God. Even though Paul has just told us that women have the authority and are competent to make their own decisions, she isn't independent from her man. They come from each other. The woman, Eve, from Adam, and men from childbirth of a woman. Scripture and nature prove interdependence, so therefore Paul says, make the decision together. That's the point. Understanding how it's going to reflect on God, how it's going to reflect on you, woman, and your husband, and the rest of the community. Sometimes you're going to have to wear a head covering. Sometimes it's not. Just make the decision together, and everything will be at peace. That's his point.
Now, in verse 14, it talks about a man having long hair, and that's a shame to him. What's that all about?
Okay, let's read through it, but let's back up one verse to put it in context. Judge among yourselves. Speaking of judging, right? Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Verse 14, does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? Question mark. I want to point that out. But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. Remember the italicized words I told you about in the New King James, that they're inserted for readability? So is punctuation. The Greek text doesn't have punctuation. You have to insert it how you think it should be read. Well, in this case, we got a problem. There is no question mark in verse 14. So what Paul is saying is, judge among yourselves, is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Proper question? This is what Kathy Schott's DVD series on women in ministry said. Quote, the International Standard Version gives the reading without the question mark. It says this, nature itself teaches you that neither that it is disgraceful for a man to have long hair, nor that hair is a woman's glory, for hair is given as a substitute for covering. It's kind of an awkward way of putting it. Let's go back to Paul. Judge among yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? And the answer is this. Paul's setting up a comparison. Does nature teach that long hair on a man is disgraceful, but long hair on a woman is her glory? No, because hair grows long on both men and women, except in your case.
And that's not nice.
Long hair or short hair is really nothing for a man and woman. If you're pushing for a covering, Paul is saying hair is a sufficient covering for a man or a woman. And he completes his argument at that point.
Well, Truth Barista, this has been absolutely incredible. If people are wanting more information or would like to contact you to ask questions that they may have about any of this that we've talked about today or in previous conversations, how do they get a hold of you?
Oh, piece of cake. Just send me an email at thetruthbarista, all one word, thetruthbarista, small case, thetruthbarista at gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions, let's start a dialogue. Let's start a discussion. I can even direct you to some great resources.
Oh my gosh, this Truth Barista is really great. I have learned so much from him, so I have been inviting more of my friends to join me in coming here to the coffee shop.
Hi, this is Jay, the Truth Barista. If you have questions or comments on this week's podcast, I'd love to hear from you. Please email me at thetruthbarista, all lowercase, one word, thetruthbarista at gmail.com.
Our culture is confused, and that confusion is spilling over into everything today. God is never confused, and those who know Him and obey Him are never confused. Confusion is a cause of not knowing the truth, but here on this program, we untangle our culture's confusion with the truth. Thanks for listening.
This is Jay, your Truth Barista. Thanks for listening to the Truth Barista podcast. The best way to find out when a new podcast drops is through RSS feed. Go to our website, look for the RSS button, press it, and then enter your email. You'll be notified when a new podcast drops. Thanks for listening.